Hello, my dear viewers. I'm glad to be with you. My name is Olga Demchuk, and I am a researcher of the inner world of personality. You should be giving me likes and leaving comments. But you might say, well, you should be making videos on topics that aren't interesting to me, not just on the ones you want to talk about. Only then will you get your likes. This is exactly how scandals and arguments arise, especially with those close to us. The topic of today's video is obligation. Let's do an experiment together, a test to determine the level of childishness in your personality. What emotions do you feel when you hear the words must, obliged, have to? The more egocentric we are, the more pronounced this becomes. These words will trigger negative emotions. A real sense of protest arises. Why should I have to do something? Why am I obliged? Because even a child sees cleaning up their own toys as an act of violence against their personality. And adults too can perceive work they have chosen themselves, work they go to of their own free will, not at gunpoint, as something similar. They can perceive every morning this way as well, as if I have to, and as though I'm heading off to hard labor. So, when we feel we must do something, this sense of obligation gives rise to two seemingly opposite emotions. The first is a kind of dejected resignation, a sadness, a sense of doom, of I must. And in this state, we even feel somewhat humiliated. And the second opposite state is this one, protest and rebellion. When we say, I don't have to, I'm not obliged, I won't. And in this protest, we feel as if we are casting off these shackles and becoming free. And the stronger the sense of coercion from must, the greater the feeling of liberation when we refuse to do it. And the personality begins to play out some very interesting dramas internally. If it has done what it was supposed to, what it was obliged to do, it feels as if it needs to let loose somewhere else, and there it does what it wants. Sometimes even doing nothing at all can't satisfy it. It's as if we constantly need to negotiate with ourselves, where one part is like the proper part, the one that says, this is necessary, these are your duties. And the second part, as if all the time, wants to overthrow the first and run wild across the field as it pleases. We will examine the topic of obligation from two perspectives. Let's start by moving on to the topic of someone owes me. When do you get the feeling? Someone owes me. Pause the video and try to put this into words. And as always, I ask you to write in the comments so that we can become teachers for one another, and so that you can add perhaps what I, of course, won't have time to cover in a 15 to 20-minute video. So, when do I feel that someone owes me? When you really think about it, it honestly feels as though our own biological parents might actually owe us a lot more than adoptive parents ever do. Just imagine that. You find out that your parents are adoptive, and suddenly it seems like your expectations of them decrease. Or, for example, when a loved one buys groceries and brings them home, you tend to take it for granted. But if it's someone else, say a neighbor who has a country house and still grows potatoes there, and he brings you some potatoes, you feel very grateful to him because he doesn't have to. You see, gratitude is connected to this topic, but that's not our focus today. So there is a category of people who, in our minds, owe us more than anyone else. And this perception is formed in a rather chaotic way. That's why adoptive parents seem to owe us less than biological parents. Because biological parents, how are they different? So all of this exists at the level of our own ideas about what is right. And if my personal expectations and deep-seated desires for another individual are significantly higher, if my specific wants, needs, and emotional requirements are much greater than what that person can realistically provide or offer me in return, then this is exactly the point where our unnecessary grievances and frustrations begin to manifest and arise. And more often than not, we tend to depend upon what we need and on the specific way that we would prefer things to be. to carefully construct a list of exactly what the other person owes us. And as soon as this person becomes a stranger, I think you've had periods in your life when, for example, you were dating someone and you had certain expectations of them, but then you broke up, and maybe you still see each other, but you no longer live together. And it's as if you need to find the right words to ask for something and choose the right way to express your dissatisfaction. It's as if you immediately start treating the person more carefully, more humanely, more maturely. In other words, you can see that as soon as something enters the sphere of our world, and as soon as I form my own wants from this person, they automatically become someone who owes me what I want from them. When I rely on my own perception, on my own desires, rather than on the other person, that's exactly why when there is no space between people and they are already woven into each other's worlds, certain things start to arise. This careless attitude appears, this lack of thought about what and how to say things. And even if you do have to think about it, it creates a feeling of, well, even with you I can't relax, with you I also have to think about what to say. The second point I want to make is this. Whenever I am giving you everything that I possibly can, you are then, in a sense, expected to provide me with exactly what it is that I need. In other words, the other person owes me when I have sacrificed a certain amount of good things, then you owe me for what I have sacrificed. You have to give me what I need, meaning once again, I am relying on myself, on my own perspective. Here there isn't really the other person as such, because making claims against someone, yes, some people say, well, explain what you need, don't stay silent, you have to clear the air. Well, you can clear the air, but that is absolutely no guarantee that the other person will suddenly become a completely different kind of person. So yes, it is necessary to explain, yes, you can do it, and yes, it does help in building relationships. But at the same time, you see, we still need to take into account the individuality of the other person. That is when I demand that they become the way I need them to be. And when I turn to them with that, I need to keep in mind not only what I want, but also this person's real capacities. It's like when we say that, well, it would be nice if a cat brought us our slippers. It is possible in theory to train a cat to bring slippers. Theoretically, it is possible, but it takes a lot of time. And when a person is training an animal, it seems as if they have more patience. But when it is vitally important to change some pattern in another person, we want it to happen immediately. As soon as I say something, it should change right away. And even better, I wouldn't have to say anything at all. They would just read my mind. There's also another very interesting point. People are convinced that if they behave properly and do the right thing, then others should treat them accordingly. And what causes the most confusion is when you seem to have been right and good, but the other person is wrong and still considered good. In other words, you have certain rules of the game, and it's quite difficult for us to perceive these rules as something that has formed chaotically. So if you sit down and ask yourself this question, what are the rules of the game? Here I am, living, playing, according to some rules. Would you be able to articulate them? You can also write about this in the comments or somewhere for yourself. These rules of the game exist. That is how things should be, how I'm supposed to act. We don't think about how they were formed, and what's most unfortunate is that we don't revisit them. We may have already changed, but the rules of the game persist. They come from somewhere in the past. And our adherence to them is always a silent message to the world. If I behave accordingly, then the world should also behave accordingly toward me. And then there's this shock when I do everything right, but the other person acts wrongly. This shock also comes from not taking the individuality of the other person into account. You see, I am always like a person who talks to themselves, building my own models, imposing my own rules of the game. And if we don't become aware of all this, there will be a great deal of both pain and anger. By the way, we'll talk about wounded self-esteem at the webinar Self-Reflection. There, we'll go into more detail about the causes of the pain that make us experience it. Let's get back to I must. But at the same time, this attitude of they owe us creates a lot of tension, and we can't have a normal conversation with the person. Because when we speak from the position of you owe me, the other person feels exactly what you felt at the beginning of the video when I asked you to experience it. You must, you are obliged. In other words, you're saying that the person definitely owes you. For some reason, they get angry and react aggressively. But if you put yourself in their shoes, you'll realize that you would react with the same aggression. Now let's expand on the topic of they owe us. I must, I have to. Saying I have to creates a feeling of constraint and being trapped. It's like a horse that was grazing and then someone put a harness on it and hitched it up, let's say to a cart. Now it's being driven somewhere, and in this state of I must, I experience a sense of humiliation, mockery, and captivity. But I think that all of you are already adults and understand that only those people who can keep their word, who fulfill the commitments they have taken on, who act systematically and methodically, achieve success in life. In other words, being able to handle obligations is an important skill. But the problem is that when I feel obligated, I feel trapped, and this leads to a sense of rebellion and protest within me. So how can we handle obligations without this tension? Because this tension creates a desire to procrastinate, to avoid doing things, to find some excuse not to do them, or simply to forget. And if we start to force ourselves, that's when burnout appears. In other words, a person can make themselves do something by force, but not for long, or they can, but there will be consequences. Various neuroses can develop, even illnesses. And a person begins to feel hatred. It seems that the activity they once enjoyed, that they were passionate about and worked on, now makes them feel sick. They simply can't do it anymore. They hate it because the sense of obligation has become entangled with it. So how can we fulfill our obligations without rebelling against them with all our might? When I entirely eliminate the overwhelming feeling of must, and then suddenly, let's take work as an example. You have to get up in the morning to go to work. That's what I do. There are many mornings when I get up for work, but this act of getting up for work feels like coercion to me if I haven't made a conscious choice in that moment. You see, the thing is, if I can choose my own clothes, I feel a sense of personal freedom and autonomy in making that decision. However, if someone just brings me clothes and says, "Here, wear this," I simply won't experience that same feeling of being free at all. Instead, I will feel like I'm being forced and controlled by someone else's will. It's exactly the same with getting up for work or performing my job duties. If I do them out of obligation rather than choice, and this inner conversation with yourself, when you realize you don't have to, you can do it or you can choose not to do it. But not doing something also has certain consequences. This approach is considerably more challenging and demanding than simply doing everything out of habit, following the familiar patterns that you have grown accustomed to over time. As we discussed earlier, when it comes to those closest to us who frequently test our patience or cause us frustration, we need to be deeply attentive, consciously present, and fully receptive to their needs. If we can cultivate a sense of being slightly more detached, then our communication will become significantly more caring, far more sensitive, and considerably more structured. I will make a conscious effort to think carefully before I say anything. In the same way, when we find ourselves feeling like a victim, as if the world is tormenting us, it is at that moment that we need to pause and realize that you don't have to. In other words, if there are no terrorists nearby who have handcuffed you to a radiator, then this is your choice. And when we step out of this sense of obligation, then it's as if in each moment I have to choose it again. Each time I have to justify it to myself and talk it through with myself. You know, it always seems like we never have time to explain, clarify, or talk things through. And in this constant rush, we doom ourselves to repeat the same things, the same rules of the game. But as soon as we start to include in this moment, I don't have to, I am choosing this right now, I choose because I understand the consequences. In this moment, I am meeting myself. And in this moment, I no longer have the opportunity to blame someone else, to blame circumstances, to feel like a victim, or to feel that I am being mistreated. In this moment, I am standing before the mirror of reality. And this is difficult, but in this mirror, I am a free person. An understanding of what I can and cannot do. When a person says, I can't stay home from work, I can't skip work because I have to live on something, in that moment, they also feel humiliated. Because when we talk about our can, we immediately, whether we like it or not, identify ourselves with our real selves. Of course, we can fantasize saying, I can do this, I can do that, I can go, I cannot go. I had many opportunities, I could do this, I could do everything, I could have gotten married, I could have gone there, worked there, but in reality, that's not the case. That is, when we move toward a realistic view of ourselves, toward our real capabilities, we discover that we are much smaller than we seem to ourselves before. Not only smaller, but also bearing responsibility for our own lives. This is what feels unbearable to us. Because if the responsibility is on me, it's as if I immediately start attacking myself from the perspective of some ideal self. A self that instantly begins to lay out a list of demands and to hate. So you see, all of this should not be irritating, should not provoke a storm of emotions. Only when I have my feet firmly planted in reality do I think in terms of consequences, not punishment. And this punishment, coercion, the feeling of being a victim, a person gets so deeply into this role that it becomes quite difficult for them to reconsider. That's all. And because of this, they feel like a martyr. And in this martyrdom, a huge number of grievances toward others arise. It's as if you're pulling a heavy load and you think, well, at least you could help me if you don't see this as a free choice. People who believe they are obligated will raise many grievances against the whole world and other people. That is, if I must, then others must as well. However, if I truly believe that it is my own personal and free choice, then I automatically begin to grant every other person the same fundamental right to make their own choices as well. You know, if we were to exaggerate the situation just a little bit, it is almost like making the conscious decision every single day to continue living with your spouse, for example. That is, deliberately making this conscious choice every single time. And in this conscious choice, a certain distance appears. A space in which you can communicate normally with another person and be more attentive. Every morning, to willingly accept myself as I am, just as I really am. That is, to willingly accept the life that I have. You choose what is available to you, what you can. Share your thoughts about this, about everything, about the possibility of freedom of choice and stepping out of the victim mindset, which imposes so much on the world and on those close to us, and which tries to find this freedom of choice, and not only to gain it for yourself, but also to give it to others. Leave your comments and like the video if you found it helpful, if you're feeling generous, because some people do find the video useful and good, but still don't click like. That can happen too. And let me remind you that the self-reflection webinar is available in English and you can get the recording. You'll find the link just below in the description. And now I will say goodbye to you. See you next time.